Well, we're happy to get started here with the program. And so, getting started here, at this time, we will call on Mrs. Radke for the opening remarks.
Thank you. You know, out of control spending, insane spending, and a crippling debt, they are an immediate and serious threat to you and your family. Friends, if we do not deal with spending, nothing else matters. Career politicians have racked up a $16 trillion debt without any regard to paying it down or what the consequences would mean to you and to your family. You know, debts like this, they kill job growth, and they eat away at the very fabric of our society. And we cannot continue to spend away our children's future. Now, George Allen, he was part of the problem. He voted for every single spending bill, added $3 trillion to the national debt, and he voted for his own salary increase when we were deficit spending. He took money from Fannie and Freddie Mac and refused to support reform, and we're still reeling from that even today. We cannot continue on this path. He voted to put corn in your gasoline tank. And he voted for the largest expansion of entitlements since Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. I have offered bold, concrete solutions that would actually get us to a balanced budget in 5 years and stop this insane spending. We need a better direction. We've got to rein in these regulators that are seizing our property. We've got to reform taxes, and we've got to end the political cronyism, both in the Democrat and in the Republican Party. But most importantly, we have got to downsize Washington, D.C. We've got to downsize Washington. We can do that together. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson, your opening statement, please.
Well, here we are in beautiful Hampton Roads, specifically Virginia Beach. Beautiful view outside. But in 2009, we lost 27,000 jobs. In 2010, we lost 7,000 jobs. Since President Obama took office, we have lost 40,000 jobs. We have had a 2% decline in real wages. In 2010 alone, we lost 500 retail jobs, 1,500 construction jobs, 1,700 manufacturing jobs, and 1,900 in professional and service jobs. Distressed home sales have multiplied 53 times in the last 3 years. Family home prices have fallen 23%. And the federal government has gone regulation crazy under this administration, harassing our small businesses through the National Labor Relations Board and the EPA, hindering the creation of jobs. Yet our region is responsible for 20% of our gross state product. If Hampton Roads' economy fails, Virginia's economy fails. The Virginia Port, the Norfolk Naval Station, 9 major shipyards, Virginia Beach, Williamsburg are all economic drivers for the entire state. The U.S. Navy reported on April 18, 2012 that this area is critical to military readiness. So it's not just the economy, it's a matter of national security. And yet the local media, except for Tony McCreaney and Steve Batten, have ignored the only candidate in the region. You would think that even if they thought I had no chance, they would want to discuss the important factors affecting Hampton Roads. The last senator here from this region was Paul Tribble. Well, folks, the media may not care, but I'm here to say we need a United States senator from the Hampton Roads region. It'll be good for Virginia. It'll be good for Hampton Roads. And with the largest naval base in the world, it'll be good for America.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Mr. Allen, your opening statement, please.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank all of y'all for joining us this evening as we have a debate focused on small business and jobs. Like most parents, Susan and I look at the future through the eyes of our children. And we've been hearing from a lot of people throughout Virginia who are very concerned about young people graduating from college these days without a job and also loaded with a lot of debt of their own as well as from Washington. As parents, all of us are determined to make sure that future generations have better opportunities to achieve the American dream than what we had growing up. And that's why I got off the sidelines and into the fight for this pivotal United States Senate seat. I envision a better future than what we're having to endure these days, and I believe it's time for America's comeback, one that allows more Americans the freedom to own their own businesses through policies that actually make it easier to invest and create jobs. A comeback that will reinvigorate the entrepreneurial spirit of our country with pro-jobs growth policies, including simple, fair, and competitive tax laws, reasonable regulations, affordable, plentiful American energy, and empowering education opportunities that will send a message to the world that America is open for business again. It's a comeback that will give Americans a smaller, fiscally responsible government that is focused on its core constitutional responsibilities of national defense and national security, and as far as possible leaves people free to chart their own courses for our families, businesses, and in our states. It is this positive agenda and my proven record that has earned our campaign the endorsement from the United States Chamber of Commerce, the NRA, Citizens United, the American Conservative Union, and others who all want to see America begin to ascend again. 2012 is our generation's rendezvous with destiny. It is our time for choosing, and freedom hangs in the balance. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. And now, Mr. Marshall, your opening statement.
Hi, I'm Delegate Bob Marshall. I've been in the General Assembly for 21 years. I have never voted for a tax increase or an unfunded debt. And by my own efforts and the grace of God, I have never been endorsed by the Washington Post. I want to tell you this. I have beaten Tim Kaine in the public policy arena on 4 very important areas. Number 1, you folks here in Hampton Roads did not have to pay $525 million in illegal, unconstitutional taxes to Tim Kaine because I filed a lawsuit, Marshall versus NVTA, and beat him in the Virginia Supreme Court 7-0. These unelected taxing authorities run counter to the purpose of the American Revolution, no taxation without representation. Our side, the conservative side, had lost until I raised $100,000 first to defend your rights because I take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, not to get reelected. You're first. The second point where I've beaten Mr. Obama is in Obamacare. In 2009, I saw what was coming down the road, and I decided, with the help of a grandmother from Richmond, to work on a bill to prevent Virginians from having to submit to buying insurance that you don't want, need, or find immoral. I introduced House Bill 10, the Health Care Freedom Act, and Attorney General Cuccinelli used that to sue Barack Obama. Number 3, whether we like it or not, Barack Obama has made social issues part of this campaign. I'm the author of the Virginia Marriage Amendment, which you approved. Number 4, Tim Kaine supported the making churches adopt children out to homosexual couples. I blocked that with your help. I hope that you consider me in November and June. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Great, and we will now move into the question portion of the evening. Our first question this evening will come from Mr. Sam Paglio, and it will go to Mrs. Radke.
Hi, Mrs. Radke.
Hi.
This question has 2 parts. It's well known that small businesses are the lifeblood of our economy, yet few in Washington actually understand what small businesses need to be successful. Specifically in regards to government contracting, first, what initiatives would you institute to ensure that small businesses get a bigger piece of the pie when it comes to procurement? And second, what would you do to ensure federal agencies are held accountable in meeting their small business goals?
Well, thank you for the question. You know, the concern that I have, number 1, when we look at job growth and when we look at jobs and when we look at the ability to hire people, every time the federal government takes more money out of your wallets and takes more money out of the wallets of the small businessman or woman, it's less money for us to spend in our private economy. It's less money to be able to hire more employees. And we've got to get away from this. Washington, D.C. every year automatically gets bigger. It's called baseline budgeting. They automatically get a pay increase. Do you get a pay increase every year? Of course not, but Washington does. The first thing that we can do is we can downsize Washington, D.C., because less of Washington means more for jobs. Now, the other thing that we've got to do, and not just Democrats have this problem, but Republicans have this problem, and that's picking winners and losers. We've got to stop picking winners and losers and saying we're going to pick the ethanol industry, or we're going to pick small niche groups that are getting buyouts. What we can do is take small businesses, we can move to a fair tax, we can take regulations and strip them away, and we can get rid of crazy things. Look at transportation alone. You've got the Davis-Bacon rule that prevents businesses from being able to be competitive here in Virginia. There's a lot that we can do to help job growth, and the number one thing is getting Washington the heck out of the way.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Jackson, would you?
Most of the jobs created in this country are created by small business. Large businesses generally are laying people off. Smaller businesses are trying to grow. We need to get the regulatory burden off the backs of small business. I ran a small business for 10 years myself, and I know what it is to have to grapple with federal regulatory agencies, have to deal with the responsibilities that they place upon you. Many of my friends are in business now. They talk about the National Labor Relations Board coming in and putting all of these onerous requirements on them. You can't ask people what their religion is, but when they come to get the report, you better know what their religion is. I mean, which is it? The other problem that we've got with procurement is they make it so complex that it tends to favor those businesses that are much, much larger. Look, this ultimately comes down to an issue of freedom. Our founding fathers came to this country looking for religious freedom, but they declared their independence over property and business freedom. They didn't want the government telling them how much of what they made they could keep. And we've got to get the government off the backs of small business if we want this country to be the greatest nation in the world in the 21st century.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Allen.
What is the question?
Yes.
Sure, yes, sir. What initiatives would you institute to ensure that small businesses get a bigger piece of the pie when it comes to procurement? And then what would you do to ensure federal agencies are held accountable in meeting their small business goals?
All right, first of all, small businesses are where most jobs are created. 80% of people work for small businesses, and that's where most of the new jobs are created. If we want to reinvigorate the entrepreneurial spirit in this country, it starts with small businesses. And I had small businesses myself that I was involved in. Small businesses hate to be tied down with a lot of regulatory paperwork. You have a dream, you have an idea. Now, when it comes to government procurement, whether it's the Department of Defense or others, I think small businesses ought to be able to get a fair shot at getting those jobs. And if you do have small businesses competing for it, and there's a 5% goal, I think that ought to be enforced. You'll end up with more competition. The taxpayers will get more bang for the buck. When you look at unemployment for veterans is higher than it is at that 9%. It's 12, 13% for veterans. There's a goal of 3% for service-related disabled-owned, veteran-owned small businesses. That goal of 3% is not being met. I think we ought to enforce it. As a U.S. Senator, I'd be riding herd on them real close to make sure they do it, because that's a great place where veterans, the people who served our country, risked their lives, they become civilians, they would get those jobs with veteran-owned small businesses, and our country would be better for it as well.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Mr. Marshall?
Well, let me first tell you what I've already done as a state legislator to help small business. First of all, I authored a statute which eliminated the internet regulations that were being run by the State Corporation Council. Small businesses now have less expensive phone calls and bills. Number two, I authored the bill, SWAM, Small Women and Minority Businesses, which meant that if you were a small business and you were approved to do business in County A, you automatically became approved to do business in County B. Prior to my law, you had to recertify yourself. Number three, I had the state of Virginia authorized to purchase equipment from small businesses on the GSA list. Number 4, I had a bill passed, which we accepted, and said you will look at generic products, not necessarily brand name products. This has reduced some of the cost that we paid. Number 5, I would support a flat tax, so you don't have to spend all of your time answering questions to the IRS. Number 6, I fought Obamacare. This will increase the taxes to small business by $1.76 trillion over the next 10 years. I would support a tax credit for catastrophic insurance, which is much cheaper and allows the business to control their insurance, not Washington.
Thank you. Our second question this evening will be from Betsy Atkinson, and it will go to Mr. Jackson.
Good evening. As a business owner, I have to balance a budget, meet a payroll, and set proper goals every day for my company. Unfortunately, that is the exact opposite of what we currently have in Washington. It is clear we need more leaders with practical business sense and experience in the private sector to get our economy moving again. I am curious from each candidate what experience, if any, do you have experience creating jobs or working in the private sector? How will that translate into serving in the Senate?
Thank you very much for that question. I ran a small business myself. I was an attorney. I represented many small businesses. As it turned out, a business came to my attention, and I ended up buying that business, getting that business out of bankruptcy. I had to pay off staff that were owed money by the prior owners out of my own pocket. I then invested to get that business up and running. It happened to be a radio station. I had to run interference with the FCC, who were challenging our license. It was a whole host of things that I experienced. And I'll tell you what else I experienced. I learned for the first time running my own small business how destructive the minimum wage is to a small business owner. It gets in your way. It gets in your way. So it gives me a perspective on small business. I taught business law and taught commercial law at the university level, gives me a perspective on small business. And as I've said before, this ultimately comes down to an issue of freedom. It ultimately comes down to whether we're going to be a nation that allows people with ideas to go out and fulfill those ideas without government in their way, so that this economy can flower and become the greatest economy that the world has seen once again.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Allen?
Well, my experience with a lot of them, first jobs other than shoveling snow was working out west on ranches, and I clerked for a judge in Southwest Virginia, and then bought an old building in Charlottesville from a Baptist church and renovated it myself and started my own law practice, and then obviously served as governor, then was with a large firm, and then after losing the last election started my own consulting firm, and starting all over again and working with technology and nanotechnology and energy businesses with it. And I understand what small businesses have to worry about, and the regulations, and it's not just from the federal governments, from local governments as well, can be a nightmare as well. The other thing is I have a record in public service, and I'm proud to say that the NFIB, Nicole, gave me a 100% record on small business issues during my service in the United States Senate. And more importantly, when I was governor, we worked really hard to make sure everyone knew Virginia was open for business. We cut taxes by $600 million. We made sure we were a business-friendly state. This will be a big contrast with Tim Kaine come the fall. Because Tim Kaine, we had 300,000 net new jobs created while I was governor. There were 100,000 fewer jobs when Tim Kaine was governor. That's a big contrast. We cut taxes, he raised taxes, or tried to raise taxes. And so while I was trying to recruit business in as governor, Tim Kaine was chairman of the National Democratic Committee, and that's not really going to help a lot of jobs for people in Virginia.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall?
Well, I've had all kind of jobs. I've been a teacher, a plumber, not the White House variety, an independent research contractor, and in the legislature, I authored the bill which set up a commission on immigration. Now, why is that of importance to small business? It's because most of the abuses that come from immigration are normally associated with larger businesses. So this gave an opportunity for smaller businesses to vent their understandings of things. Additionally, I was the author of a statute which required that if there is a bid made pursuant to the Public-Private Partnership Act for a school or a road contract, that you must disclose the particulars of the contract once the contract is awarded. Now, that's what's going on with this bridge fight over here with the administration wanting to put tolls on Tunnel A to pay for Project B. You've got to disclose that. Prior to my law, none of this was disclosed. So my 21 years has been government in the open.
Great. Thank you. Mrs. Racky?
Thank you. You know, I've worked in corporate America. I know what it is to be self-employed. I've worked in nonprofits. I've led in civic organizations. And I also know what it is to be a mom and feel like the federal government's coming into the four walls of your living room and the choices we have to make, whether it's at the grocery store or just trying to provide for our kids. And we need a mom's voice in the U.S. Senate. That's what we need. We don't need more career politicians. Look, we've got to break away from the status quo political Washington profile of career politicians and lawyers. We've got enough of that in D.C. Enough. Now look, we need a fair tax. We got to stop killing businesses. We got to rein in regulators. Let me say something. We cannot return a politician like George Allen who voted for trillions in spending and spent our children's money. We cannot do it. And lastly, we can't have someone that continues, and I would ask George, you pick a special interest group like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Your colleague, Senator Hagel, and 25 other senators begged you to support the reform of Fannie and Freddie because they saw what was coming down the pike. And you refused to support it. You took money from Fannie and Freddie Mac and refused to support the reform, and we are still reeling from that today.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Racky. Great. Our next question will come from David Creasy, and it will go to Mr. Allen.
We know that Medicare is basically running out of money to cover the benefits promised. We know that Medicare Part D is basically unfunded and is going to balloon over the next decade. Whereas we've heard many reasons for this, how do each of you propose to ensure that Medicare remains solvent?
Well, first and foremost, we need to make sure and guarantee that there's a commitment for our seniors and the people nearing retirement for the benefits that they've actually paid for insofar as Medicare is concerned. I do think we need to work on ideas to strengthen Medicare to make sure it's there in the future. It is a guarantee that is there and people have paid for it. One place where savings can be made, and this has been identified, over $50 billion is wasted annually on fraud that has been identified by the Government Accountability Office. That means we could save $500 billion over a 10-year period with that. The other thing is to look at ideas, put them on the table on possibly gradually increasing the age for Medicare eligibility. It wouldn't affect anybody who's anywhere near retirement at this point, but for the future, I think that makes sense. People are living longer, healthier lives. Income adjustments also may be indicated. It's something that we need to hammer out because it just can't continue the way it's going right now because the funding is not sufficient for the benefits. As far as Medicare Part D, what you need is more competition. We want more choice. That's what we were working on. And part of that is to make sure that you have, if a person has high blood pressure, it's better to give a medication than to wait until after he has a stroke. And the other big solution is having individuals in charge, not the government. And I'm a strong proponent of health savings accounts, not just for everyone else, but our own family uses them. And when Congress and the White House is imposing Obamacare on us, it ought to apply to them as well.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall?
Well, let me tell you some of the things I've done that have affected health care. Number one, I chaired the Stem Cell Commission for 3 years. We arrived at a conclusion that the benefits to individuals from the use of non-embryonic stem cells could help people across the board for diabetes, which is a major factor in Medicare, for other individuals. I even got liberal Democrats to agree with me on this. And I chaired that commission for 3 years. I additionally made it harder for an insurance company to drop people for missed payments. I also made a requirement, and I got the insurance and the lawyers to agree on this, that if a request for a medical service is there from a neurologist, only a neurologist can deny the service. Too often, a secretary with a statistical diagnostic manual was saying no. These people later years are on Medicare and getting in big problems and dumping this onto the public. I do agree with my colleague. We may have to look at some of these age factors, but an additional measure would be to allow reimbursement for adult daycare. If you had reimbursement for adult daycare, many children could take care of their parents and not put them in nursing homes where so much of the Medicare money is being wasted.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Mrs. Radke?
No, I just want to make note that we didn't get an answer on Fannie and Freddie. And we keep getting the dodge on spending, dodge on adding trillions in debt. And now we have this issue. The only one on this stage that voted for the largest entitlement that was not funded, as the panelist noted, Medicare Part D. Now, in the last debate, George Allen said that that was then and this is now. The problem is that we have solutions on the table now. Paul Ryan put out a proposal, a very solid, bold proposal to reform Medicare. He came out and he said we've got to look at insurance premium programs. And that has not been embraced. He's refused to embrace it. Now, large health savings accounts is another wonderful program, because the thing that needs to happen in Medicare is that we have got to put the control back in the hands of the people. You've got to have the options. You've got to have the choices. And you do not need Washington, D.C. coming down and dictating to you who you should get your care from, where you should get your drugs from, what doctor you can see. That has to stop. And that means that the federal government's got to stop intervening. There are bold proposals, but we need a U.S. Senate candidate that is not going to run from reform, but is going to stand up and lead and be a fighter for you. And I want to be that fighter.
Thank you, Mrs. Radke. Mr. Jackson?
Well, first thing we need to do is get rid of Obamacare. Do away with that once and for all. And then, of course, we've got to introduce market forces. Folks, it keeps coming back to the same issue, doesn't it? Freedom. Freedom. Right now in our own country, in Galveston, Texas, they have allowed people to privatize part of their Social Security, and people are building wealth. They're even doing it in Chile. I think if Chile can handle it, I think we can too. We've got to allow a program like such as what Paul Ryan suggested, something akin to Medicare Advantage that gives people choices and introduces market forces. Every time the market gets involved, prices come down. And every time government gets involved, prices go up. It's not hard to figure out. And obviously, if we're going to take care of our seniors, and I believe this is a sacred covenant. My father died in 2002. And he needed Social Security. He only got $158 from Sun Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company. But if we're going to fill that sacred covenant commitment, we've got to go through government with an axe and cut out all the stuff that we should not be spending money on.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Our fourth question here from Tim Sampaglio will go to Mr. Marshall.
Mr. Marshall, spending has got to be brought under control. In these tight budget times, it's important for our government to operate as efficiently as possible. As Senator, how do you plan to hold federal agencies accountable to fiscal stewardship?
Can my wife answer this? Well, number one, this will not be easy. We have not had a balanced budget since 1969, and the so-called surpluses in the 3 years at the end of the Clinton administration were because $259 billion was, quote, borrowed from trust funds, civil service, Social Security. That's not the way to do this. What I would suggest is to bring light to the issue. Match the revenues and the expenses. There are 13 appropriations bills that are dealt with every year. The budget's not always dealt with. We haven't had one for 3 years. But I would put an amendment to each appropriations bill matching the revenues to some prior year before, so that all the appropriations bills added up to the incoming revenue. Would I win the vote? No. Could I get a vote in the Senate? Yes. I spent 6 years on Capitol Hill studying parliamentary procedure, putting Tip O'Neill on record. I know how to do that. If I did this and got 26 votes in 2 years, you, the American people, could see who is serious about cutting debt, not who simply says, well, let's have a balanced budget amendment, let's have a line item veto. Those things are pie in the sky. They take too many steps to achieve. You can have an amendment right now on each appropriations bill to see who is serious about cutting the expenses, and that's what I would do.
Thank you. Mrs. Radke?
It's like I said when I opened, that if we do not deal with spending, friends, nothing else matters. You realize I have a 5-year-old here on the front row, Luke. He's 5 years old. If you have a child that's 5 or younger, or a grandchild, do you realize that before your kid is old enough to vote, before they're even capable of having a say in the direction, the wrong direction their country is headed, that all federal revenue coming into the government will be used to service the debt and pay for entitlements? Now, I am the only candidate up here that has focused my campaign on spending and has provided substantive, quality solutions to balance the budget in 5 years. A matter of fact, yesterday, PolitiFact and the Richmond Times-Dispatch came out and PolitiFacted it. It's called My 2 Cents. And it says that if we were to freeze federal spending at current levels, because I don't believe the federal government should get a pay raise every year and expand, and eliminate baseline budgeting, and cut 2 cents, 2 pennies off of every federal dollar spent, we could balance the budget in 5 years. They said it was accurate, but they said it was unrealistic because we don't have politicians that know what to do, can roll up their sleeves and get it done. Guess who can get it done? This mom will get it done. This mom will get it done.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson?
Well, I've made it a point not to criticize any of my fellow candidates because I honor them all. They're all very decent people. But we do have to draw distinctions. Now, I believe that spending is critical, absolutely critical, to get under control. But what good will it do to have a child that doesn't owe any money because the federal government has balanced its budget if that child is not free under our Constitution and under our system of government? We have got to make sure that our Constitution is honored and we stop violating it and shredding it and treating it like it doesn't matter. Now, I would favor a constitutional caucus in the United States Senate. I would seek to, I'm meeting with Jim DeMint before too long, I would seek to involve him, Rand Paul, Marco Rubio, Mike Lee, a number of other senators who could care about our Constitution to stop the spending that we should not be doing in the first place. We're $1 trillion in debt for school loans. Where's the constitutional authority for the government to be in the school loan business? And look, and the other thing, yes. And I would favor a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. I think that will work a whole lot better than a proposal of free spending. It's been tried several times. It has never worked.
Thank you. Mr. Allen?
There's a lot of spending increases, especially in the last 3 years. People have talked about my time in the U.S. Senate. Let's remember what happened. I remember after a few months of getting to the Senate in 2001, we were hit with the horrific attacks on 9/11. And our country needed to respond to those attacks to make our country more safe. We needed to avert a recession, and we certainly needed to support our troops who are in harm's way in the field. And I've been working hard for many years to rein in federal spending. In fact, even before 9/11, when I was in the Congress, I introduced a balanced budget requirement in the Constitution and line item veto authority and taxpayer protection. We got it to a vote. When I was in the Senate, I proposed that again. I think that's the long-term solution because all these other gimmicks don't work. Super committees, commissions don't work. The state operates with a balanced budget requirement, as do 49 other states. The president ought to have line item veto authority. I was one of 15 who voted against the bridge to nowhere. Well, if the president could veto that, I guarantee you wouldn't get a 2/3 vote. The spending that has occurred in the last 3 years has put our creditworthiness at a downgraded status for the first time in history. Future generations are being loaded with terrible levels of debt that are going to diminish the opportunities, not just for them, but future generations as well. So I think there's a variety of things that need to be done. There needs to be prioritization.
Thank you.
And the number one responsibility is national defense, and all other is secondary.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Our next question will come from Betsy Atkinson, and it will be addressed to Mrs. Radke.
Ms. Radke, I'm the proud mother of 3 children, all of whom graduated from Virginia state colleges and universities in the 1990s. However, I hear constantly from my friends and coworkers who have children in high school and currently in college that the annual double-digit rise in college tuition is crippling their ability to plan for their children's college education. For some families, despite saving for years and have a difficult time paying for their children's college, it is state tuition. What are your plans to work with Richmond to make sure that Virginia's finest institutions of higher education are still affordable to her citizens?
Well, we have something in common because I have 3 children, although they're not in college yet. Look, education is very near and dear to my heart. And we've got a problem with education. The first problem we have with education is that it's in Washington, D.C. It's in the Department of Education where it doesn't belong, frankly. We've got the federal government in charge of the loan program. They've totally seized it. And somehow Washington thinks that's a good idea. It artificially inflates rates when you do that. We have got to get the federal government out of education, period. And that means getting out of No Child Left Behind, George. It means getting out of No Child Left Behind. Now look, I've got some time left, so I want to go back to what George just said. I cannot believe we're going to blame $3 trillion in spending on war spending. I don't remember Medicare Part D, and I don't remember No Child Left Behind, and I don't remember your salary increase being a part of war spending. That is not why we had $3 trillion in debt. It was on the domestic side why we had $3 trillion in debt. That's why we raised the debt ceiling 4 times. Friends, we need bold leadership, and we need people who are going to fight for us and stop the crazy spending in Washington, D.C., not dodging. Now, on the balanced budget amendment, let me say this. George Allen ran on the balanced budget in 2000, got elected, and did nothing for his whole term until it was time for re-election. That is a dodge. We need someone that's going to focus on cutting spending and be serious about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Record. Mr. Jackson?
Well, I said earlier that when government gets involved in anything, prices go up. Now, my wife and I put 2 children through college, and we had to work very hard and borrow and go through a whole lot, and we watched each year tuition go up, whether there was a recession or not, whether the economy was doing well or not. So the first thing we've got to do, we've got to get the federal government out of Virginia's business, by the way. I think it's time for us to reassert the power of the 10th Amendment of the Constitution and say you don't have any business in our education business. And look, if we get the economy going, if we unleash the productive and creative capacities of our people, we get our energy out of the ground and offshore, we allow these small businesses to grow. My wife and I put ourselves through college for the most part working because there were businesses and we had jobs. And we need to give our children a chance to work their way through school, and that's what a booming economy will do. And if I go to the United States Senate, I am going to fight to get government off the backs of small business so that you can grow and hire and our economy can boom again.
Thank you. Mr. Allen?
I agree with Bishop Jackson on part of balancing the budget is constraints. And just think of how much better our economy would be if we did have that balanced budget, and line item veto, and a paycheck penalty that I proposed for members of Congress if they don't get their appropriations budget bills done on time. Now on tuition. This is important. This is something that is part of leadership as far as I'm concerned. Leadership is determining priorities, setting them, and then getting others to agree on that mission. When I was governor of Virginia, we made that a priority to freeze, and we froze college tuition. At universities, at community colleges, we increased the tuition assistance grants for the Virginia students going to independent colleges. We felt that education is very important and making it affordable. We also worked on workforce training. That's another aspect. For young people who are not going to college, trades and skills are very important. Welders could write their own ticket. This is a big contrast to Tim Kaine. When Tim Kaine was governor, tuition went up 33% during his 4 years because of his neglect in funding for higher education. Governor Bob McDonald has reversed that. He has the same views that I do and makes higher education a priority. And that will help create jobs here in Virginia, because the other aspect is not just the cost of college education, is when you get out of college, you want to have a job to start your career, start your life. And so, yes, you need to have affordable quality education, and you need to have a vibrant economy for jobs and opportunity for the graduates.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall?
Well, with the exception of the last 2 semesters in college, I paid my own way. My wife and I homeschooled all 5 of our children up to about the 6th or 7th grade, when it got too hard for me going back and forth to Richmond. I would suggest the easiest way is the minimal intrusion of the federal government to deal with tax credits for individuals who want to do this, but make the family the guarantor, if there's going to be a loan, of the loan. Otherwise, because you need experience, the voice of experience, to tell the young people, you may not want to get into this much debt because you may want to buy a home, you may want to have children. You don't need to do that. So, but let me go back here to some of these other questions. The 2-cent solution that our colleague has proposed depends upon Mr. Bernanke not raising the interest rate. It has to eliminate the Bush tax cuts.
No, it doesn't.
And it has to handle $1.425 trillion in deficits to flatten those out. When I took numbers from OMB, the revenues are about still $409 billion short, because the interest, if the interest rate remains the same, increases from $230 billion in 2011 to $480 billion in 2016. There is no easy way out of the situation we're in, folks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Marshall. And now our 6th question for the evening will come from David Creasy, and it's directed to Mr. Jackson.
Many small business owners want to provide affordable health care for their employees. However, due to current laws and regulations, we're put into a risk pool by ourselves, which drives up our individual cost. We were talking amongst ourselves. One such case was 45% increase 1 year over the next. Do any of you have a way to put us into a larger risk pool for small businesses to be grouped in, so that we small businesses can help provide more affordable health care?
Yes, David, there's a way, and it's called freedom. You give businesses freedom. You give businesses the opportunity to develop their own mechanisms for providing their own health care. Look, whenever people are free to innovate and figure out solutions to problems on their own, they come up with things that work. We need to have market forces operating, not the government telling you what you can and cannot do, what kind of service you can and cannot provide, putting you into a risk pool whether you like it or not. We've got to allow freedom to prevail within the healthcare market. Now look, every small business that was promised, as we were, 2 years ago, healthcare costs are going down now, has experienced dramatic increases. Individuals have experienced dramatic increases in health care. Now, I don't know how many times this has to happen in history before people actually get it. But when you get the government involved and they start foisting these requirements upon people, you make it harder to do business. You know, right now there are people out there looking for jobs. And by the way, veterans under 24, George, the unemployment rate is 29%. 29%. You could hire them if the government would get out of your way and make it possible for you to do that. And that's why I think this election ultimately comes down to who is going to be a champion for freedom and get this government back within its constitutional limits.
Thank you. Mr. Allen?
Well, judging from what I've been hearing from small business owners all over Virginia, the one thing that we need to do first and foremost is repeal Obamacare. Tim Kaine may call it a great achievement. I want to be the deciding vote to repeal Obamacare. What it needs to be replaced with are health savings accounts. Health savings accounts have a high deductible, the costs of it are less, People can take it from job to job. They don't have to worry about pre-existing conditions, but it covers major medical expenditures. It is the way that we need to change the mindset of healthcare. There's so many folks who, when you ask them, how much did it cost? They say, well, I don't know, insurance covered it. Well, there's a cost to it. It's like the difference of going through a grocery store and somebody says to you, well, buy whatever you want, we'll pay for it. Well, if somebody else is going to pay for it, it's a completely different way than when you look through the grocery store and look at what's the unit prices and is the store brand cheaper than the name brand and all the rest. And so we need people caring about the cost. Here's another enabling thing for small businesses. If you could be in a big group, that would help a great deal. Those groups ought to be across state lines. Betsy, you're a realtor. Let realtors in North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland all join together and avail yourselves of lower rates. And that's something that if the federal government needs to be involved to allow that interstate commerce or those compacts across state lines, I'm all for it, because I think we need to have more affordable health insurance, and small businesses who create most of the jobs are the ones who need to have that sort of assistance, and I'll be aiming to help you in that regard as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall?
Number one, I have introduced legislation to allow Virginia residents to purchase health insurance in adjoining states. Number two, Senator Coburn had a bill which would have given a tax credit or exemption for individuals who bought catastrophic insurance. This is the better solution to Obamacare because it lets you make the decisions instead of Washington. That is one of the problems. Everything Obama does, he wants to bring power to himself and take it away from you. Third, I filed a brief in support of the state of Arizona for stopping illegal aliens from coming into the United States and taking up so much of our health care and other social service expenses. I did file that brief, that case before the Supreme Court. Number four, we need to have admission into medical school based on the sanctity of life ethic of the Hippocratic Oath. If you want to be a banker, go to Wharton School of Business. If you want to be a doctor, take the Hippocratic Oath. Ever since we have departed from that, we have had unnecessary medical interventions. We have had increases in fraud. You need to have people with an ethical bearing first to practice medicine before they lay hands on you.
Thank you. Mrs. Radke?
David, I know what you're talking about. My husband and his work, we have a $5,000 deductible, which isn't pleasant. But I think, you know, there's a dean at Harvard Business School, and she talks about needing to move to consumer-driven healthcare, where we put healthcare back in control of each one of you in your seats. You know, remember, healthcare being provided by businesses came back from the old days when we had price controls and businesses were trying to provide incentives to hire people. But think about it. You purchase your life insurance, you purchase your home insurance. You're smart enough, you can pick your health insurance. You don't need government and you don't need it to be provided for you. It would provide a tremendous amount of competition. Now, we've seen this with healthcare sharing co-ops, where people have gotten together, pools of people have, you know, automatically gotten together and provided that kind of care and gotten the things that they needed. Large health savings accounts is the way to go because you're in control of your health care dollars. Now, I've heard George talk a lot about he wants to be the deciding vote on Obamacare. But when he ran that undisciplined campaign, he gave the Democrats that vote that they needed to ram through Obamacare. Now look, I have fought as the Tea Party leader for the Health Care Freedom Act. The Health Care Freedom Act said that you cannot mandate health insurance in Virginia. And we picked up 5 Democrat votes in the state Senate to make that happen. And now that cannot be foisted upon you here in Virginia.
Thank you. That concludes our portion of the question and answer period. And at this time, we'll give each candidate a brief 2-minute closing statement. And we'll actually start in the reverse order from which we started in the beginning. And so our first closing statement will come from Mr. Marshall.
We are friends up here, but we do have some differences. For example, when I was in the Assembly and my colleague here was governor, he supported the construction of an interchange that VDOT had never contemplated to bring Disney to my district. Well, Kings Dominion paid for their own interchange, so did Busch Gardens. I call it corporate welfare. Other people call it economic development. Number 2, in 2006, I opposed the transfer or giveaway of the toll road, Dulles Toll Road, to the Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority. This was done by Governor Kane. Governor Kane was in Loudoun about 15 days ago, congratulating my colleague here for his support of this. This cost overrun project, most of the jobs are going to Maryland union officials. There's only 26% support for this. The Federal Transit Administration had to fudge the figures to do this. We could have received about $550 million from an Australian consortium to build this. Now, taxpayers are going to be stuck with this. I don't think we should do this. I have beaten Tim Kaine. He supports secret tax money, secret campaign money. I had a bill in which would have required anybody to accept money only if you can identify the donor over the internet. Tim Kaine opposed that. Tim Kaine supported stimulus money to the Virginia budget. I opposed it. When Republicans wanted to divert $620 million in retirement money, I opposed that. Tim Kaine is predicating his campaign on polls, and he thinks he can beat the former incumbent based on his record. I cannot be tagged with any of that. I've got clean hands on spending. I've got clean hands on debt. I have never betrayed my oath of office. I put my constituents first. You can expect that I will annoy liberals in D.C. just as much as I've annoyed them in Richmond. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Allen?
Well, it's great to be with all of y'all near Cape Henry, just up the coast here where our country began. And I'm optimistic about America's future. I'm optimistic because of freedom. And not only is freedom the God-given birthright of every one of us, it is the most powerful idea and successful idea in all of human history. Our nation was founded on history, but these days, Americans' freedoms and our opportunities are at risk because of the overspending, overregulating, high tax, big government policies of President Obama, Tim Kaine, and the Washington liberals. This election is about setting the course for America's comeback. And it's a comeback propelled by the invigorating breeze of freedom, trusting free people to make decisions for themselves and their families, unleashing our free enterprise system with simpler, fairer, more competitive taxes and reasonable regulations so that entrepreneurs can start and grow their businesses without being stifled by the heavy hand of government. This election is about the freedom to use the blessings of our plentiful American energy resources, including right here off our coast, that we ought to be allowed to produce that oil and gas and use those revenues for royalties for roads and transportation in Virginia rather than have them off limits. It is the freedom to choose our doctors and get the best quality health care, not have it rationed by Washington. It's about protecting worker freedom, the right to work without being compelled to pay union dues as a condition of holding a job. It's about protecting individual freedoms enshrined and guaranteed in our Constitution, from freedom of religion to our natural right of self-defense to private property and the prerogatives of people in their states. My friends, if you want to see a renaissance of American freedom and opportunity, then I most respectfully ask you to help us and join us and vote for us on June 12th and also in November, and keep smiling because we're helping Americans catch their dreams. Stay positive and strong for freedom. Thank you all so much.
Mr. Jackson?
Well, let me take off my Marine Corps hat and put on my minister's hat for a second and caution all of my colleagues on this podium. We cannot tear each other apart. Draw contrast, yes, but one of us is going to have to fight Tim Kaine. And we want to make sure that we can unify when that time comes. Now, we are facing a vital decision. Anyone up here could be a U.S. Senator. I believe that. I respect every person on this podium. I respect them. But when George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison were all in the same room, they weren't all suited to the same task. One we needed for the Revolutionary War. One we needed for the Declaration of Independence. One we needed for the Constitution. And the question you have to answer is, who is suited for the moment at hand? That's the question. That's the question. Who can articulate our vision in a way that not only reaches your heart, but reaches the hearts of those neighbors who aren't in this room? Who can reach those people out there who are black and Hispanic, who are not part of our movement because they've been lied to and told that we're bigots and we're haters? And we want them to know we care about you as individuals. You have a God-given right to reach your full potential in life. And who, my friends, can defeat not only Tim Kaine, but Barack Obama? And make no mistake, you got to do both. Now look, Barack Obama and Tim Kaine both graduated from Harvard Law School, and so did I. They drank the Kool-Aid. I did not drink the Kool-Aid. So if you let me be your United States Senator, I will expose them for the Kool-Aid drinkers that they are. I will send Tim Kaine into retirement and send Barack Obama back to Chicago or Hawaii or wherever he wants to go.
Thank you.
I ask for your vote. I ask for your prayers. I ask for your support. God bless you. God bless the United States of America.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mrs. Radke? A little quiet. Thank you. Mrs. Radke?
Well, I want to thank the panelists for being here. Appreciate it. If we don't deal with spending, friends, if we don't deal with spending, nothing else matters. I'm saying that as someone from a master's degree to a mom. It is a critical issue. The definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again and hope and pray that you're going to get a different result. But I believe that Virginians are craving a new generation of leadership. They want to break away from that status quo Washington profile of a lawyer or a career politician. Now, I've worked in corporate America. I've worked in nonprofits and civic organizations. I've done a lot of different things. I know what it is like as a mom to feel like the four walls of government coming into your home, to feel like with all the dictates and the mandates and taking your money and taking away your ability to provide for your family and be prosperous. And whether I've been at the water cooler at work with my 3 kids at the swimming pool, churches all across the state or civic organizations, I hear the same complaint everywhere I go. The career politicians are destroying this country and they do not deserve another chance. And they're right. We can do better. We must do better. This is not about sending a person to Washington. It's not. It's about saving people from Washington, D.C. America needs a new generation of conservative and courageous leadership that can inspire young people to believe in the conservative message again. Not because we say it, but because we live it out, to provide them the opportunity to restore their trust in our government. We've seen this new generation of leadership with Rand Paul and Marco Rubio and Mike Lee. We need someone up there that will fight for you. I will fight for you, and I am asking for your support to be your next United States Senator here in Virginia. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you. Well, thank you. And this concludes the debate, the second debate in a series of 3. I believe the next one will be in Northern Virginia. And so we certainly want to thank the candidates for taking time out of their busy time to be here and to inform the voters on their positions. And we certainly want to thank the audience for taking time to start your weekend with a debate such as this. So thank you again and have a good evening.